Welcome to Restaked, brought to you by Swell Labs. Join us as we explore restaking through conversations with the leading experts in this emerging ecosystem.
Everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Swell Podcast, where we're going to be covering everything Ethereum, restaking, and pretty much everything else going on in the crypto market. For our first episode today, we have Anthony Sassano, a long-term ETH bull, solo staker, and advocate for the Ethereum ecosystem. Welcome, Anthony.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
I think we can jump straight into topical news, which is Bybit hack that took place. Obviously, there was about $1.5 billion worth of ETH that was effectively taken out of circulation. So maybe partially bullish, but also very bearish for the industry as a whole. If that is the face of the industry, and you're seeing that amount of money being hacked and stolen by a state actor, of course that's a net loss for all of us. So I guess some questions on that. Anthony, what are your thoughts on actually stopping that flow of funds, via different protocols, taking that role of sort of like stepping in this, censorship resistant world that we live in or want to live in. And when you have a state actor like North Korea coming in and, doing a hack at this level, what should we do as a community, and what should our role be?
Yeah, I mean, this hack is, I think, the biggest exchange hack ever in terms of dollar values. Obviously, there have been bigger kind of centralized exchange-related fallouts, like with FTX and MTGOX in terms of just sheer size, but those were collapses rather than hacks. Bybit is solvent. There's nothing wrong with Bybit. They were able to process everyone's withdrawals just fine, so they haven't gone under or anything. And I think they've replenished basically all the ETH that they've already lost through buying some on the open market and also getting loans from various parties in the ecosystem. So yeah, I just wanted to make that clear for people, because even though it is the biggest hack, it doesn't mean that Bybit is insolvent or anything like that. Just to make sure people are clear about that there. But yeah, I mean, it does bring up a lot of questions about things. We saw that the funds were withdrawn, and then there was a bunch of different things done with the funds. Some of them were traded for BTC on Bitcoin through some of these bridging protocols that exist. There was, I guess, like some that was staked ETH that was traded into normal ETH, and then I think that Mantle froze a bunch of the ETH that was staked with them, and basically we're able to save about $50 million worth of it. And then there were some discussions around that and around, as you said, like, is this the permissionless kind of ecosystem that we always dreamed of, with all these kind of backdoors and stuff in them? I think when it comes to centralized actors kind of wielding their centralized power, it's like a fair game thing, right? Because if you're using a centralized stablecoin like USDC or USDT, they have backdoors like built in, like they have freeze functions built into them. So you should not be under any illusion that you have censorship resistance from, holding these stablecoins. You really don't. You have it like on the Ethereum network. The Ethereum network itself isn't going to censor your transfers, but Circle or Tether may, for whatever reason, censor you and freeze your funds, right? And for them, they can just do it because these tokens are IOUs. The actual cash backing it is in bank accounts controlled by them, so they're not worried about that there. But yeah, I don't think anyone should be under the illusion that they're getting censorship resistance if they're holding these centralized stablecoins. And same goes for using centralized protocols. There are a lot of kind of protocols on Ethereum and other chains that are centralized. They don't hide it. They make it known that they are centralized, and people shouldn't be surprised if those centralized controls are used, I think, because it's kind of part of the contract that it's like more of a social contract. That's not a literal contract that you enter when you use these sorts of things. So yeah, I think that people should be aware of that. But in terms of Ethereum itself, the Ethereum network censoring things, we saw a couple of years ago the OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, censored, or at least put sanctions, I should say, on Tornado Cash, which is a privacy mixer on top of Ethereum. Now, they weren't able to fully censor Tornado Cash because it is a decentralized permissionless protocol, a subset of the network as part of the MEV Boost pipeline. Started censoring these transactions, but you got censorship, on a per block basis. And essentially what that meant was that you could still get your transaction included. It might just be included in a few blocks time instead of one block time, because some entities on the network were censoring you there. And then there was a lot of chatter in the fallout of this Bybit hack about rolling back the Ethereum chain. Now, Tim Biker on Twitter had a really great explanation as to why this isn't actually possible. So people should go read that tweet for a full explanation of this. But the only people that were saying this were like Bitcoin maximalists and other kind of ecosystems, other layer one ecosystem proponents, because they were trying to spread FUD. No one in the Ethereum community was calling for a rollback. No one was entertaining this idea. No one was entertaining the idea of saving these funds at the protocol level or anything like that. That is just not going to happen. You know, Ethereum is so big, so decentralized that the only time that we would even begin to entertain an idea like that is if it was a critical bug in the protocol. Let's say, for example, there was a bug that resulted in infinite amounts of ETH being minted. Of course, we would want to fix that. No one would be against fixing that. But for these sorts of things where this was Bybit's, screw up, they're the ones who got targeted and got basically spearfished by North Korea here. It's not going to happen, right? And that's due to Ethereum's decentralization and credible neutrality, and the fact that the Ethereum community, pretty much everyone, I didn't see anyone from the Ethereum community call for a bailout or a rollback here, because it's not something that the Ethereum community is interested in. It's not something that the Ethereum network is built for. It's truly trying to be this immutable, decentralized layer there. I ranted on a little bit about that, but it is obviously a big topic to talk about.
Yeah, so I think to dig a bit deeper, right? Obviously it was denominated in ETH and SDETH and like METH. Should those liquid staking protocols use whatever powers they have to freeze the funds? Do you see that as our moral duty, or is it fair for a DeFi protocol to say, look, I'm like this is an open market, and what I do for one now I have to do in every other scenario, just because, you know what I mean? Like what precedent does this set?
Yeah, I think it doesn't really matter if I or you or anyone else believes what they should and shouldn't do. I think what matters is the fact that if they have the ability to do it, at some point, a nation state is going to compel them to do it. So for example, if you are a US-based DeFi protocol and you have centralized controls in your protocol, the US government could compel you and force you to do this. And if you didn't do it, if you had the ability to do it and you didn't do it, they could, the Department of Justice could come after you and say, you had the ability to save these funds, you didn't do it, you failed in your fiduciary duty to your users, here's a fine, or here's we're going to prosecute you, so on and so forth. So centralization is actually a massive liability here, if you're not going to use it. There's no point having a centralization vectors in your protocol, in your app, whatever it is, if you're not going to use them for things like this, right? And as I said, it's a liability. It doesn't matter if, I believe they should do it or shouldn't do it. The reality is that if you aren't decentralized, then you're open to these nation states requesting this. And if you don't follow with their request and they know you have the ability to do it, you can be prosecuted for this or face massive amounts of fines. We're humans. We exist in the real world. We're not, we haven't uploaded our consciousness to the digital world yet. We still have to abide by, the laws and regulations of the real world. So I think from that perspective, that's what teams should be thinking about when having these centralized controls in place and when deciding whether they are going to use them or not.
Cool. Maybe moving on from Bybit, maybe a difficult question right now. Is there anything that you're bullish about today?
I mean, I guess for context for people, we're recording this on the day, on a pretty bad day in the markets. I think Bitcoin's about to lose 90,000, ETH's under 2,500. The whole market just seems to be kind of cratering right now. I think, I say this a lot on my own show, and I say this a lot on Twitter. I generally don't really pay much attention to this kind of short to medium term stuff. I'm definitely always like a long-term person. I look very long-term out, to be honest, like multi-year, even multi-decade sometimes, because there are certain things that, if I go back to 2020, I looked at some of the roadmap items back then, and I already knew they were going to take like 5 to 10 years to play out. So I've always had a long-term outlook here. But when it comes to the market generally, I think we've had a very, very weird bull market overall. I think BTC has done obviously quite well due to the institutional adoption that it's had, and of course, Sailor. Other things, there's been other outliers that have done well in terms of like crypto specific things. Like for a while, meme coins were doing well, and now they're doing really badly because they're all not good long-term holds. ETH, didn't go to an all-new time high yet. It went to $4,000 a few times there. I think it suffered from the fact that this cycle has been so weird, and obviously Solana gained a lot of prominence as well because of the meme coin stuff. So yeah, just overall, I think that people are very disappointed in this market cycle so far. I don't know if it's over or not yet. I don't know if we're going into another bear market or anything like that. But in terms of what I'm bullish on, like it's the same thing I'm always bullish on. I'm bullish on Ethereum's long-term kind of roadmap. I'm bullish on us executing on this. We're executing on it much quicker these days than we have in the past, both at the core protocol level, at layer 2s, and all the apps on top of it as well. And I think that when it comes to value accrual, it's always hard because like it's not just crypto, it's also the wider macro environment, right? You have Trump threatening all these tariffs. You have Trump basically saying he wants Canada to be the 51st state. Like these sorts of things add a lot of uncertainty to the markets, and the markets hate uncertainty. People will play defensively. They'll say, well, why am I going to hold these risk assets, especially crypto, if there's all this uncertainty in the markets? We've got no idea what the president of the US is going to do. Is he going to kill NATO? Is Ukraine going to fall to Russia, right? There's all these geopolitical macro stuff. And in a high interest rate environment as well, that's putting a lot of pressure on markets, especially risk on markets like crypto. So I think that you can't just look at crypto alone. You have to look outside of it as well. But if you were just to pay attention to crypto alone, I think we've seen a lot of extraction happen this cycle through meme coins. I think a lot of money has left the ecosystem, and a lot of people have gotten scammed, and a lot of people have lost a lot of money. And we never really had the chance to kind of have that bull market that we all like, because people just lost too much money too quickly. And you've probably seen on Twitter, a lot of people will talk about this. Pump.fun, the creators of that have taken, I think, $500 million worth of money out of the ecosystem. They've just cashed it out and gone on their merry way. I mean, kudos to them. They're basically making money off of the app that they created, but that is value extracting out. And the Trump meme coin extracted out a lot of money. Libra from Milei in Argentina, that extracted hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars as well, and all the other ones too. So when you have so much extraction going on in an environment where people are risk off because of the macro stuff and the high interest rate environment, it's going to be very hard for things to go well, at least in the short to medium term. If I'm looking longer term out over multiple years, obviously a lot of these macro things change. A lot of things can get better over time. A lot of stuff can improve. But yeah, I think short to medium term, it's very difficult to say because there's just so much uncertainty right now.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think like one of the biggest things that we've seen is just market exhaustion. More recently, and like, well, at least what we think is that during like QT, when I think this is the first time crypto has really felt QT.
Yes, definitely.
In this level of QT. And I think what this has led to is general like nihilism in the market, where what's the point in looking at fundamentals if crypto is going to go down anyway? So I might as well gamble away into this meme coin and potentially make money, or I'm going to lose it anyway. Like you could have held ETH and like lost money, most probably all year, or you could have lost it in meme coins. I think what we're really excited for is like as QT winds down, I do think fundamentals will make a comeback. Crypto will start going up and people will start connecting the fundamentals to value going up. I think that's the major thing that's like exhausting the market. It's probably what's impacting ETH the most right now. I think Solana definitely capitalized well on like essentially GambleFi over QT, which I think draws a lot of parallels to the real world as well, right? Like during periods of QT, you see in general like low income families like go more towards things like lottery tickets, and I think essentially crypto is having its real life moment almost or over this cycle of QT.
Yeah, and I think if you kind of like think about the QT and QE thing, and you're right that crypto hasn't really existed in a QT environment. People, I guess, got a bit entitled with how the cycles went. They're like, oh, BTC will pump, then ETH will pump, then the altcoins will go nuts, and then we'll have a bear market. Whereas, yeah, this cycle has definitely not played out like that. Really, I mean, it kind of hasn't. I guess if you count like meme coins, I guess like a lot of the speculative energy went there, but it was very extractive. It wasn't based on fundamentals, as you said. But at the same time, it's kind of funny because I speak to a lot of people that are part of the TradFi institutional world, and they all relay the same message to me that given that the regulations in the US are now a lot better for crypto, and given that the SEC is finally friendly towards crypto instead of hostile, these institutional kind of investors and money allocators and these TradFi people, they're very, very bullish on crypto, like incredibly bullish on crypto. And they're slower to move. So you're not seeing much of it yet, but you will as time goes on. But it's just such a stark contrast to crypto natives, because as I said, I think crypto natives have this belief or entitlement of how the market is supposed to go, or how the market cycle is supposed to go. And they're upset that it didn't happen like that, at least up until this point, right? Whereas the institutional grade investors and TradFi, they're new to crypto. They're still very excited about it. They're excited by the prospect of things like DeFi, of stable coins, of stores of value that aren't tied to any nation state, of decentralized technology. They actually are really excited about this. And of course, building their businesses and expanding their businesses into the on-chain economy. So we're going to have, I think over the next few years, just a huge shift from what the crypto natives dominating things and like this retail kind of domination to the institutional stuff, to the TradFi stuff. And I do think fundamentals will shine through them, because these institutional and TradFi players, they're not going to ape meme coins, right? They're not going to ape celebrity coins. They're going to be investing in things where they can see real businesses being formed, real revenues being generated here, and allocate accordingly there. Because a lot of the time, or pretty much all the time, it's not their own money, right? And they're heavily regulated too. They have a huge fiduciary duty to the people whose money they manage, not to put it into these things, not to put it into scams. So they're going to do the due diligence, and they're going to allocate where they see fit. And I do think Ethereum thrives in that world, because Ethereum has the most serious, the most long-term sustainable businesses on it already in the form of DeFi and others. And I do think ETH does very well in that world as well, as like an index bet and everything, as like a store of value, as a commodity money. But that again is longer term. As I said, TradFi stuff moves very slowly. It's on the kind of yearly time frame, whereas the crypto native degens, they're on like the 1 minute time frame. If something's not happening every minute, they're not satisfied.
Yeah, 100%. I think the net flows on ETH, on the Ethereum ETF now is sitting around $3 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And that's even after the ETH grayscale outflows. Which, like you said, I think you've been making a point for a while that it's a trickle, right? It's a tap that just trickles over time, and eventually that becomes like a waterfall. As ETH gets more and more into the hands of different TradFi investors, they start to understand the tokenomics and the superior sort of security budget, right? As you've mentioned before, the Bitcoin, and basically the fact that it's this whole economy, and there's apps on top of Ethereum that are obviously making hundreds of millions of dollars. Do you see that as only accelerating over time? Like, TradFi flows will only increase over time?
I think so. I think a lot of these players just aren't set up to allocate yet, and they haven't got the sign off from their boards, from their lawyers. It's a very slow moving machine, and they're not in a rush either, right? They want to do it right, make sure they aren't getting scammed, make sure they aren't going to lose money. Because if they do, there's just massive fines. People can get prosecuted. It's not good, right? And yeah, they're definitely not in a rush to do this, but they are excited about it. From the conversations I'm having, and right now, I think they're just learning the lay of the land. They're definitely trying to kind of nail down where they want to deploy their business to. And this is where something like an Etherealize comes in, which is a new initiative that's been spun up in order to go and talk to these players and get them to build on Ethereum instead of somewhere else. And I think Ethereum is very nicely positioned, because I do think that the L2 model, the roll-up model, will appeal to these institutions, because they'll be able to build their own products and services as like an app chain, for example, and they'll be able to retain the control that they want over that, because it's never going to be decentralized. Obviously, they want controls over it for a number of different reasons, but that doesn't mean it can't plug into the wider decentralized on-chain economy. It can't benefit from those kind of like network effects of liquidity of users and a global user base there. So I think that we're going to see more and more of that. But as I said, it's going to be a longer term thing. It's going to be a trickle, as you were saying, not just in capital, but also in announcements of different companies and different institutions building on Ethereum, building products on Ethereum. But that's all going to just be additive over time. And I do think that hopefully after this latest, I guess, degen meme coin cycle we had, we can move past that becoming the main thing in crypto. I do think that there's always a spot for that, but I hope it basically gets relegated to being a minority thing in crypto. I hope that the majority becomes this sustainable stuff like the DeFi protocols that I've been talking about, the institutions building on it, and stable coins as well, things like that, making real projects and real protocols that serve real people instead of just like hyper speculative extractive stuff that scams everyone, unfortunately.
Yeah, 100%. So like touching on each value crawl, right? We had last year the massive run up on restaking, initially led by Eigenlayer and then Symbiotic, and then on the BTC side with Babylon. Now we're sort of at a point where slashing is going live. It's just gone live on Symbiotic. It's going to go live on Eigenlayer soon as well. And you're seeing a lot of capital outflows, and you have this marketplace of capital that's seeking higher yield through restaking, and you have these AVSs that are obviously meant to be providing this yield. So I guess the question here is, from your perspective, do you actually see this as a sustainable way for Ethereum stakers to earn additional yield via restaking? Or do you think, given the current state of this marketplace that's meant to, pay yield to suppliers of economic security, do you think that this will not stand the test of time?
I think that there was a lot of hype for restaking initially for a number of different reasons. But I think if you're talking about real value accrual and yields, there's not going to be like 100 AVSs that are giving a good yield, right? There's going to be like a handful that generate a lot of revenue. They're probably going to be things like an Oracle service, like a sequencer, things like that. The things that have these kind of obvious value drivers or fee drivers that they can then kind of push onto these restakers. But there is also a participation kind of thing as well. It's like, you don't like selfishly as a restaker, as part of these AVSs, you don't want too many people restaking there because then your yields go down, right? So I think it'll reach an equilibrium just like ETH staking seems to have at this point, right? Because at the end of the day, like there's a point for everyone. Like some people will look at 3% on ETH and be like, oh, that's good. Like I get that you paid out in ETH. I like that. Other people will look at that and be like, why would I care about 3% on ETH when ETH is so volatile? I'm going to go do something else. So there is an equilibrium that eventually gets reached here. And the same thing is going to be true for restaking and for actual kind of fee accrual here, not tokens, like actual revenues that people are paying. But there's only so many services that people are willing to pay for. And a lot of them get internalized too. Like, I don't know if you guys saw, but Pump.Fun had been using Radium as its AMM, but now Pump.Fun is developing their own AMM. So Radium is, its token has gone down a lot because everyone's like, well, if all of its volume was coming from this one app and now that one app is internalizing that, well, then this is not worth anything. So I think the same thing happens a lot across crypto where the apps don't want to bleed the value to the chains, for example, or to another third party. They want to internalize that value for themselves. So that's why I think that the same thing with kind of restaking happens, where there's going to be a lot of these apps being like, well, I want to internalize all the revenue and they'll pay it out to their restakers for providing security. But it's not going to be hundreds, as I said. It's probably going to be like a handful of them that generate sustainable yields over time. And it is definitely going to depend on the participation rate as well. If there's too many people in there, the yields are just going to collapse. And it could be quite volatile with yields too, because a lot of the, I guess, fee revenue that's generated in crypto is due to the volatility of the assets and due to a bull or bear market. Whereas if you're thinking of things like more sustainable, I think oracles are a pretty good proxy here. Like oracles are always needed, whether it's a bull or bear market. But even with oracles, a bull market's better for them because you want more assets supported for more markets to go live in order for more fees to be generated, sort of thing. So yeah, that's my general view on things. I think that like anything, restaking went through this kind of hype phase, then it went down, like everyone kind of got over it, and now it's just going to climb that massive hill to get back up there and become, I guess, like more sustainable there.
Yeah, I think just a follow-up question on that. For the average staker, right? It's quite a big learning curve for them to, understand restaking and then, to further basically quantify the actual slashing risk of these different AVSs. Would you like say most people should be restaking? Do you think it's more for this like sophisticated players, or again, is your viewpoint that hey, this will mature over time, and then it will be very well understood, and then it will sort of open up for the masses?
I think for the foreseeable future, it's definitely for the more sophisticated participant, because as you said, there are additional risks on top of vanilla staking, and this slashing that you're talking about is very different to how Ethereum does slashing, where it can be subjective. It can be, there's so many different services that you could potentially be restaked with, that one of these services could be just like really shitty, and they slash you for whatever reason. But as far as I know, a lot of the slashing is pretty centralized, where it can be reverted if need be. So probably not like a massive risk, but at the same time, these LRTs that have come to market, these liquid restaking tokens, they make it really easy for anyone to just opt in, right? And they don't know the risks. So I think that I think there is someone creating this. It might be live already. I don't remember, like an L2 beat for restaking, where essentially it tells you all the risks associated with all of the different restaking protocols and tokens. And then I imagine that expands to the AVSs as well. But again, if someone's buying an LRT on like a Coinbase, they're not going to read this, right? Unless Coinbase presents it to them, and they may not even understand it from there. That's why I think a lot of this stuff will just end up being very commercialized eventually, where the companies will like offer this product, take a cut, and then take on all the risk for you. So you don't, like, for example, if you are holding one of these tokens on Coinbase, and Coinbase, let's imagine they offer this service, you're holding an LRT on there, and they basically say, well, we're going to take all the risk. If anything happens, we'll cover it, sort of thing. I think that's what's going to happen, because that's what happens in the TradFi world. Like, people don't want to take risk. They want to be doing things that are relatively safe. They want to earn money on it. They'll pay the fee. It's fine. We all have money in bank accounts. We all pay fees for the convenience, and for them basically holding our money instead of us holding the cash in, under our mattress, sort of thing. So I think that's probably the end game there. But for the foreseeable future, it's definitely something for the more sophisticated participant. And I do hope that people buying these things at least do some research about it. But I do think that because a lot of the slashing is quite centralized, anything bad that happens, it'll probably just get reversed, honestly. Like, if the ETH goes into a contract, and that's like where the slashed ETH goes, and the contract is owned by some, EOA or some multi-sig, they're probably just going to reverse that if it was done in error, for example, right? If it wasn't done properly. So that is a saving grace as well, I guess, but not a long-term sustainable thing, that's for sure.
That makes sense. How do you see restaking versus maybe the other side of deriving stuff from mainnet, being based rollups and potentially more recently based apps? How do you compare that to something like restaking?
It depends what you're looking at, right? Because it can be pretty complementary, where essentially if you have an LRT, you already have exposure to Ethereum staking yields, like the vanilla staking yields. So if there are based rollups on the network and they're generating more fee revenue for the L1 validators, well, then you're already getting exposure to that, right? And then you would obviously throw on any additional yield that the, AVSs are paying out to you on top of that. So I think they're very complementary. But I mentioned before about how there can be sequences that an AVS can be a sequencer. That's different to a based rollup. That would be like a sequencer that's generating its own fee revenue there. It's not using the L1 as its sequencer or a bridge or something like that. So yeah, it seems quite complementary there. It doesn't seem competitive, to be honest, because of the fact that you're already getting exposure to anything that's giving fees to the L1 validator set to begin with. Like, you're already exposed to that, and then you just get the additional stuff on top of it.
Makes sense. In terms of the Ethereum ecosystem right now, what do you see as something that you're super excited for over the next few years, whether it's roadmaps or maybe more interesting on the DeFi fundamental side? Like, which part of DeFi do you think goes to TradFi? First, I think we've already seen part of this with like Aave. But maybe outside of Aave, because I think Aave is a bit boring. I think it's pretty obvious that Aave is going to go and do something there. But outside of Aave, outside of Borrowland, do you think there's anything else that will emerge out of DeFi that goes towards TradFi, whether it's AMMs, like maybe seeing TradFi move away from centralized order books?
Yeah, I think you mentioned Aave and money markets. I think that is the thing that appeals to them like the most, because in TradFi, a lot of, I guess, like especially like wealthy people, they love leveraging, not leveraging, but like borrowing against their assets, right? They don't want to sell their assets. You hold some Apple stock, you hold some Nvidia stock, whatever it is, you want to borrow against that. You don't want to sell it because then you have to pay taxes, right? And then you lose the exposure to that asset, but you don't have cash. You're like, oh, well, I need money to buy things, right? I want to buy things, but you don't want to sell, so you borrow against it. So I think that's why money markets appeal to them probably the most, is because they're already doing that in a huge way in the TradFi world. It's just that the DeFi money markets make this all, much more efficient, much more transparent, much more secure potentially as well, and kind of makes it all easier for them to do, and gives them access to new assets as well, like ETH and BTC, for example. So I think that's probably number one for them. AMMs definitely would be number two, or just decentralized exchanges in general, or just on-chain exchanges. Doesn't necessarily have to be decentralized, but just like on-chain exchanges would appeal to them as well, because Forex is absolutely massive. Like imagine moving all of Forex on chain. That would be huge. We already have huge stable coins. Imagine basically making stable coins of every currency and then just having the entire Forex market on chain. Like that would be a massive unlock for them, because again, this is a massive business in TradFi already. Like there's hundreds of currencies around the world. People want to swap in and out of them all the time. And there are people that trade this day in, day out. I remember listening to a podcast from Mike Novogratz, who's kind of infamous in the crypto community. He's an early ETH investor, was involved in a bunch of different things, was also involved in Terra. He's got the tattoo on his arm of the Terra wolf that didn't age very well. But he said that he used to trade like Forex markets every day. And he was making a joke because he's like, these things move like 1 or 2%, not even a day, like, 20, 30 bips a day, but people still trade them. And it's an absolutely massive global market. So I think that's going to come on chain eventually. Trading stocks, trading bonds, treasury, whatever it is on chain, that's a huge thing. And that is all just part of the on-chain exchanges there. And I do have this thesis that potentially, a bunch of these companies and institutions are going to get together and create a consortium where they essentially create their own NASDAQ as an L2 on top of Ethereum, their own new kind of exchange to trade these real world assets on, these stocks, these bonds, these fiat currencies. So I think they're gonna do that as well. So I think those two things are probably by and far the biggest, and they feed into everything else, right? You can have like all these other DeFi primitives basically working within the exchanges, working within the money markets, and I think that's going to appeal to them a lot. I also think that with the staked ETH ETFs going live, that's going to appeal to them too. They're going to be able to offer this yield onto their customers. They'll be able to do more exotic things with the ETFs as well if they want to. That's all coming as well. But yeah, from what I can imagine, and from what I know from speaking to different people, that's what they seem to be most excited about. Stablecoins definitely as well. Like that's an absolutely massive thing for them. I think that stablecoins, it always gets brought up, right? Because as I said, like they don't necessarily care about decentralization of the products themselves. They care about decentralization insofar as it offers them security and reliability, which is what the Ethereum network offers. But stablecoins, they're like, I don't care that these things are centralized. They're still offering a real service. I can still use them. I can move massive amounts of money around the globe instantly for very cheap. No need to go through just ridiculous amounts of middlemen to do it. No need to trust people. You can just trust the smart contracts sort of thing. And really, you're just trusting one company like Circle and Tether, right? Not to freeze your funds or seize your funds there. And Circle's based in the US. So if you're using USDC, you've got some recourse there as well. But yeah, that's definitely what I'm seeing.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Okay, maybe like moving on to, I think this was a bigger question a few weeks ago. It's maybe died down a bit now. So maybe we can change it a bit. How do you think the Ethereum Foundation has been doing as of recently? Do you think the changes that they've made and the way that they've been moving has been in the right direction? Is there anything that you personally would want to see out of them?
I think that they've been doing like a really great job for years now. I think they get a lot of kind of undeserved criticism. There is obviously things to criticize them about, and they could be doing better. But I think that they're probably the thing that they do worst is marketing themselves. And I think that they've stepped up the game over the last few months of better marketing themselves. But really, it can feel like a black box sometimes with the Ethereum Foundation, because they have hundreds of people that work there. They do a lot of R&D. They're pretty heavy on the R&D side of things. And unless you're in the weed, unless unless you're talking to these people, you don't really know what they're doing, right? Like you need to be in the weeds sort of thing. So I think that the Ethereum Foundation has always just sucked at marketing themselves generally and marketing the people within them. And as I said, because it's heavy R&D, they're not marketers, they're not business developers, they're not people who are going to jump on and be degens in the trenches sort of thing on Twitter and spend all day on Twitter. They're doing a lot of work in the background. So I think that they can be a lot better with marketing themselves, and they have improved that a lot, I think. But on the overall, I think they're doing an amazing job overall, honestly. I think they're doing an amazing job with developing or being part of the development of the core protocol, funding all the various research initiatives. They're doing a lot of initiatives around L2 interoperability, which is obviously a big issue right now that needs to be solved. Chain fragmentation generally there. They're executing really well on the roadmap. They're doing a lot of, I personally believe they host the best conference, DevCon, the best crypto conference, like really ever. I think that they host the best one there. They started doing more public stuff by reviving the Ethereum Twitter account, which was quiet for a while. They started using DeFi with their own treasury, so on and so forth, right? So I think when you look at it like that and look at it from that perspective and dive deeper into it, they're just doing a really, really great job. It's just that they do a really bad job of marketing, that they're doing a really great job. At least that's my view there. But there's always room for improvement, of course. There's always more that they could be doing, and I think they recognize that. But this goes back to what I was saying about like the TradFi people and the institutions. The EF is quite a big kind of place. It's a flat organization as well. So it can be harder to change things there and slower, and they're slower to move than people would like. And they definitely don't want to move too quickly because they don't want to make the wrong decisions. And they also don't want to exert too much influence over the ecosystem because they're trying to ensure that Ethereum grows as a community. So the wider Ethereum community fills the gaps that need to be filled, rather than the EF being the one that always fills the gaps. And that's my view as well. I don't think the EF should be doing most things in the in the ecosystem. I think they should be doing, a few things and doing them well, which, as I said, they do R&D stuff. They run a couple of conferences, DevCon and DevConnect, and they do a bunch of grant giving as well out to different projects, a bunch of initiatives in different places around the world. Help ETH Global, which is hackathon that gets hosted pretty much everywhere in the world. So they are doing a lot of great stuff there. Too much to list, honestly. But I don't think we should be trying to force them to do things that they're not built to do. I think that there should be other kind of companies, initiatives, whoever it is in the ecosystem filling that gap, because you can do that. There's no need to even go to the EF for permission. Like, you can do whatever you want in the Ethereum ecosystem. No one's going to stop you, and you'll be able to have an impact that way as well.
That makes a ton of sense. And maybe to like wrap things up as a final question from our end, and maybe something that would be super useful for any listeners. If you're a listener that wants to make a positive impact in the Ethereum ecosystem, because it sounds like, and I think as well, like one of the major issues that Ethereum does have is the chain is not marketed. When everyone thinks about Ethereum, decentralization comes first to mind, and it's like, it's just a bunch of Raspberry Pis around the globe that people are running code on, which is definitely not true. So if you were a listener, maybe two sides is, what is, in your opinion, the best way to get closer to what the Ethereum Foundation is doing and why? And yeah, like, because I think maybe for you, it's, I think, pretty simple to talk to people at the Ethereum Foundation, but if you're an everyday user, that's not something that I think you can really do right at that moment. So like, yeah, well, what's the best way for everyday users to get closer to what Ethereum's doing? Because I think the more users that we have looking at it, the more voices that we can get out about Ethereum and really spread the word about like what actually makes Ethereum great.
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying that if you want to kind of be closer to what the EF is doing, you kind of need to understand that a lot of it is very technical, a lot of it is very in the weeds. So if you're not interested in investing the time to actually understand a lot of the stuff that they're doing, then it's probably going to be a waste of your time. Like there's not really a casual way to keep up with it, I believe, because a lot of it is inherently complex because it's complex stuff that's going on with the protocol. A lot of it is stuff that is being worked on for years before it even makes it into the protocol on the kind of like R&D side of things. So yeah, I just want to preface that by saying that if you are interested in keeping up with it, it is something that requires a lot of interest, and it is not just a casual thing that you can do here. But in saying that, there's a few different ways you can keep up with it. You can go follow the Ethereum and the Ethereum Foundation Twitter accounts. And then from there, you'll find the different Ethereum Foundation people. I'm not going to name all of them because I don't know all of them, but you'll find them as time goes on. Twitter will suggest more to you. Just following them is really good because they tend to post about things that they do there. People, just to self-shield here can follow my own show, the Daily Gwei, because I cover a lot of this stuff. But as I said, like it's a time commitment, 30 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I do an episode on this. It's not all EF stuff, but I do cover a lot of it on there. But again, it's a time commitment. It's something that just isn't a casual thing. But those are probably like the best places. Farcaster as well, like following people on Farcaster, just to keep up with everything that's happening there. But just inherently, you're not going to get like a centralized repository of information for the EF because, as I said, it's a flat organization. Each member there feels empowered to do what they want to do, to work on what they want to work on, to share what they want to share on Twitter, and so on and so forth. So that's what I try to keep on top of and try to cover and try to stay updated with. But it is inherently a time-consuming thing. It's not something that's going to be you're going to be able to keep up with casually. And really, at the end of the day, I think most people don't need to keep up with the day-to-days of the EF and what they're doing. I think really what's only relevant is probably stuff that's user-facing for them. So, for example, when a fee is going to get cheaper, when is L2s going to be more interoperable, things like that. That's the stuff that probably you want to keep up with it. But at the end of the day, like even keeping up with it, you can be like, okay, well, I'm keeping up with it. I know it's coming, but until it's actually delivered on the network, that's kind of a nothing for you. So if you're just a casual user and you want to kind of be getting the benefits of what the EF is working on, the best thing to do is just like wait until it gets delivered on the network and then you'll get the benefit from it, right? So there is a bit of balance there to those things, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I can say I was listening to Sassel when you still did the daily shows. I know it's it's not as consistent anymore, but I used to just cook food, put my headphones on, and listen to my 30 minutes download, and it helped me a lot, right? It gave me direction on, okay, maybe I should spend more time on those, learn more about L2s when L2s were starting to pop up, learn more about liquid staking when Lido just launched, etc. And so, yeah, I can definitely testify to that. Yes, I guess to wrap it up, one final question is, what controversial predictions do you have for the rest of this year? Not only Ethereum related, maybe your predictions like, hey, this is the end of Solana, the reckoning has come. Like we'll see it for what it is, or maybe something else that maybe people are not looking at that you have pretty strong conviction in that it will happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think when thinking about like controversial opinions, it's kind of hard because a lot of people give a lot of opinions on Twitter, and any opinion that I give you'll probably have heard before. But I think the top thing that I've been thinking about, especially over the last couple of months, is that the competition across like every, I guess, sector of crypto is only going to get more fierce over time. And I think that there are certain protocols that are just going to become so entrenched that they're going to be very difficult to either dethrone or to compete with. And I think that we're already seeing this with things like Aave, for example. It seems to be very difficult to compete with Aave, just by nature of the fact that they've been around for a long time. They're very trusted. They have these partnerships with TradFi. They're going to get more partnerships. TradFi are going to get their tendrils in, and then they're going to basically king make certain protocols as well, because if, for example, you see BlackRock using a protocol, you're going to be like, well, if BlackRock trusts it, I can trust it, sort of thing, right? So there's going to be a lot of that going on. But as for like the chains as well, there's going to be so many, like there's already a lot of chains, but like, for example, you mentioned Solana. I mean, Solana is a fast and cheap chain, but so are L2s. And there's more L2s coming online that are directly competing with Solana. I know Eclipse, for example, is an L2 that uses Solana's tech. Mega ETH is coming online. Then there are other L1s like Monad that are going to come online and compete there too. Sui, Aptos, whatever. So there's all this competition. And I think the problem is that we haven't really expanded the crypto native user base too much, right? From I guess being just all about speculation. People come in, they bid on meme coins, they lose money on meme coins, and they go away. But where the actual real long-term adoption is going to come from is from those kind of bigger players, the TradFi players, the institutional players. And I think that because I do believe that most of them are going to end up choosing Ethereum to deploy their products on and get traction on Ethereum and do a lot of stuff in the Ethereum ecosystem, it's just going to become harder and harder for other protocols to compete here, I believe, over time. So that's maybe my most, I don't know if that's controversial. It probably is in some circles, but that's something that I see happening this year and into the next few years, especially. And I also see a lot of the speculative kind of stuff like it might seem like it's not going to come back right now, but it eventually will come back, unfortunately. And it's going to do even more damage next time than it did this time. And I don't actually know how to prevent this from happening, because in a permissionless ecosystem, obviously, it's a feature, right? But the bug to me is people promoting it. So all of the influencers promoting it, promoting the actual scams. The honest meme coins, if anything even exists anymore, but like the honest ones, like that's fine. But the problem becomes is that like you got these influencers that just shill this stuff, these literal scams and these grifts, and then all these celebrities come online and do tokens, and then people are like, oh, this is onboarding people. It's like, no, it's not. It's not onboarding anyone, right? This is a pump and dump. Like, so I really hated to see over the last 12 to 18 months that they became so normalized, and there were some of the biggest kind of leaders in this ecosystem promoting this stuff. I'm very glad that Vitalik didn't promote this stuff and actively called it out. That's one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on Ethereum, is that because it has a culture and a leadership that doesn't kind of buy into this nonsense that gets peddled. But I unfortunately think this is going to keep happening again and again. And I think it's actually net bad for crypto. I think it's very zero sum. I think that it's destructive, and I think that it actually harms real adoption. And I think that the reason why it's taken us so long to get any real adoption at this point is because of this mass extraction, where anyone's exposure to crypto is usually just the casino. And if you're coming into the world's shittiest casino and then losing all of your money, you're not coming back for a while. Maybe you come back in like a few years' time when you've forgotten the pain of the last losses that you suffered. But yeah, I honestly don't think that that's a feature. I think it's a huge bug. And I hope that we can get more sustainable stuff going, with these TradFi institutions coming in, doing DeFi stuff, doing stuff with stable coins, stuff that offers real value to the everyday person, instead of just everything being about the casino. Because as I said, it's net bad and it's net extractive, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. So thanks, Mr. Anthony Sassano, aka Sassel, for coming onto the Restaked podcast, and we appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. Maybe Sassel, if you want to show your channel, your Twitter, quick before we wrap up.
Yeah. I mean, people can just follow me on Twitter. They'll find me as Sassel0x on there. I'm sure that they can find me pretty easily. And then I do a semi-daily. So every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I try to do an episode of my Daily Gwei podcast, which is an educational podcast all about Ethereum. I think I mentioned earlier, it is kind of quite technical. It's not something that is for the casual person, but if you want to dive deeper into Ethereum, I'm biased, but I think that's the best place to do it.
100%. Cool. Thanks for joining. And
awesome. Thanks for having me.
Restaked is brought to you by Swell Labs. To find out more about Swell, go to swellnetwork.io and make sure to search for Restaked wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. Make sure to hit the follow button so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening.